paper is about wallpaper and how thoughts, feelings and lives become entwined in the temporal layers of papered walls. It is also about wallpapering and the creative play of wallpaper in negotiating memory. I'll begin by telling three very different accounts that explore the medium of wallpaper and through which we can frame an understanding of it. The first is told in a colourfully illustrated book by Leslie Hoskins called The Papered Wall. This is essentially an historical work which also touches upon some of the tactile and temporal qualities of wallpaper. I will focus in particular on the post-war period, a time that we'll return to later on in this talk. Printed and patterned wallpapers probably came into use in the late 15th century. These were products of the emerging crafts of paper making and printing. They were printed on small, single sheets and used to decorate walls, ceilings, furniture, books, and boxes. In the late 17th century, the apparently simple step was made of joining these sheets together before they were printed on. The trend of technical ingenuity was set and continued over the following 250 years. An industrial race followed for commercial, aesthetic, and technical superiority that produced a huge spectrum of designs. Wallpapering gained fresh impetus in the years following the Second World War, when the concept of DIY took off and gave rise to numerous books and magazines on home furnishing. The picture here is taken from Modern Painting and Decorating, an illustrated room-by-room guide for every handy man. The caption below it read, "Despite the small size of this bedroom or bed-sitting room, the decoration in restrained contemporary style provides plenty of interest and encourages a feeling of cosy comfort. A neat wallpaper of modern design is combined with a light grey wall paint, and the small pictures are well placed to add to the interest of the scheme. Well-bound books in a modern bookcase complete the picture. The ceiling would be in ivory distemper." The sale of wallpaper to consumers of all tastes, classes and pockets became important at this time and led to a number of interesting innovations. The tradition of rolling wallpaper with a pattern on the inside was inverted, so that the pattern was presented outwardly to the consumer. As you can see, the advert here predates this change. Easy mix pastes and ready pasted papers became available, replacing earlier organic flour and water pastes. And samplers were produced, facilitating the display of wallpapers and the coordination of these papers with printed fabrics. This trend continued into the 70s and 80s when bright, metallic and textured papers came into vogue, and thankfully where this account ends. However, before we continue, I would just like you to take note of the wallpaper highlighted in the top right-hand corner of this picture for future reference. Hoskins gives some further insights into the material and temporal qualities of wallpapers in a section on rescue and care. She emphasises the fragility of wallpaper. Styles and patterns go in and out of fashion and are deliberately obliterated. If older schemes have been preserved, it is not usually out of forethought for history. She also identifies the interpretative possibilities of layered papers. These wallpapers were salvaged from a fine Georgian house in Highgate, London. The caption read, "On separation, they give a great deal of information about the use and decoration of a room," a theme that we'll revisit later on. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, or Stetson as she was called before her divorce, gave a very different tale of wallpaper in 1892 in her absorbing, upsetting and beautifully written short story entitled The Yellow Wallpaper. This was a semi-autobiographical narration of one woman's negotiation with postnatal mental illness, her caring but insensitive husband, and the impressive qualities of the wallpaper in the barred room of former nursery in which she became incarcerated. At the start of the novel, the narrator expresses her feelings of hatred towards the paper. "It is stripped off the paper in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach. I never saw a worse paper in my life. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles and destroy themselves in unheard contradictions. The colour is repellent, almost revolting, a smouldering, unclean yellow, a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulphur tint in others. However, when her husband ignores her fragile state and refuses to repaper the room, since of course this would only be giving in to her weakness, the wallpaper takes on a sinister life of its own. It gains malicious intent, and she likens the pattern to a broken neck and two bulbous eyes that stare at you upside down. The movement of light across the walls creates an impression of animation, and at night a woman, whom the reader comes to recognise as the heroine herself, creeps around, apparently trapped behind the bars of the pattern. The paper becomes a fixture of fascination and torture. The book ends after weeks of torment when she takes action to release the woman from her papery prison. I peeled off all the paper I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growths just shriek with derision. Her husband faints. My third tale is taken from an article by the anthropologist Victor Buckley and touches upon the transformative role played by wallpaper in the fight against bourgeois consciousness in 1960s Soviet homes. When Stalin died in 1953, the new government, led by Khrushchev, revisited some of the principles of the 1920s revolution that focused on domestic architecture. If Stalinism had allowed free domestic expression and so harboured the bourgeois tendencies that the revolution had tried to eradicate, this was just a blip in the process of becoming fully communist. Massive new housing projects were set up, along with a campaign to regulate the behaviour of householders. People were encouraged to streamline their belongings, rid themselves of elaborate decor, and engage in the reformist principles of minimalism. Within the popular literature that was handed out at this time, wallpaper and painting interestingly played an important role. They were cheap, available, easy to use, and most importantly, transformative, as this picture from one such magazine shows. Household coinciding with communist holidays such as May Day and the anniversary of the October Revolution in 1917. This was policed by regular inspections of housing committees. And so Buckley concludes that the seemingly banal activity of regular wallpapering and painting served at once to reaffirm the pursuit of domestic pleasures by a household and to give concrete expression to the construction of socialism and the legitimacy of the state. With these thoughts in mind, I'll turn to my own encounter with wallpaper and introduce the dimension of memory. This account begins in 1998, when after a long period of decline, Springfield House, a farmhouse near Fleetwood in Lancashire, was completely stripped and refurbished. My grandparents moved out, my uncle and his family moved in. It was an important transition, the end of a reign. My grandma had lived there since 1954. My granddad, like his father, was born there. I visited the house in its most naked state. The walls were stripped, the laths were bare, previously unknown details were exposed. An infilled well, soft clay floors, blocked-in doors. What also caught my attention were the layered fragments of paper that still clung to the walls, some that I recognised, some that I didn't. And like the archaeologist I am, I collected these remains, put them in plastic bags, and kept them as a sort of archive. As the papers sat in their plastic bags, we'd often talk about sitting down sometime and going through them together. So when I started to think about this talk, I took them out, scanned them, and sent copies to my mum and grandma. We each wrote down where we thought they'd come from and what they made us think about. And after various discussions along the way, we assembled these thoughts and reflected on them. The following narrative is created through these wallpapers and the collected memories of my grandma, my mum, and me. These two papers were taken from the former sitting room wall. This was a place where our memories coincided. It was a cosy family room that contained everything that you'd expect of it. There was a fire, a piano, family photos, a loud ticking clock, a cabinet of heirlooms, a tree at Christmas, and a large, loud TV. This is where I learnt to enjoy football and horse racing and to tolerate cricket. It was also a place where our memories were compressed. My grandma remembers papering this room regularly because of the damp, and the place must have changed and witnessed many different comings and goings. However, all of the papers seemed very similar to us. This feeling of stasis was fixed in several generations of family photos, and maybe as a result of this, our memories were homogenised too. The papers from the main bedroom told a different story. Here our memories were stratified and complementary. The earliest, rosy paper was on the wall when my grandma arrived at the farmhouse in the 1950s. She papered over it with my uncle Richard in his cot to keep him out of the paste bucket. She remembered having problems getting it to stick on the walls and couldn't move the wardrobe by herself. And as a result, part of the room remained unpapered. My mum vaguely remembered the earliest papers, but focused her memories instead on the yellow flowered paper, which coincided with a time when she shared the room with her younger sister Helen and possibly her baby brother George. She remembered lying in bed watching the patterns in the paper as the sun moved across them. She also remembered the hollow in the mattress, or as she put it, the place you slept being already made for you, and the secretive feeling of reading in bed when they were meant to be sleeping, and her dad sorting them out in the night when they were scared. I only remember the blue paper that was probably pasted on in the late 1960s. I first associated it with my teenage uncles, their red record player, listening to ABBA and teasing them about their girlfriends. Sometimes I went to this room to read, and once I was caught here in the dark eating after-eight mints stolen from underneath the Christmas tree. It was also the last upstairs room that my grandma slept in before she came very ill and went into hospital. By this time I remember that it felt and looked old and neglected. I've chosen the last three papers because they gave rise to less harmonious, more creative memories that led us to question how and what we were remembering. This fantastic paper, as you'll probably guess, dated to the late 1960s. My grandma remembered it as a dashing sale paper that she used to cover over worn patches in the kitchen. My mum, perhaps appropriately, thought that it was from her bedroom as a teenager. She'd really liked it and felt that it was quite trendy. She also remembered that this was the time when her mum was feeling innovative with decorating, which included painting the farmhouse windows a coral colour and mixing grit in with the paint. This creativity wasn't always very well received, and Mum remembered criticism and feeling defensive about it. This paper was similarly contradictory. For my grandma, it was her prettiest paper that she'd used to decorate the parlour in combination with a pale colour wash. For me, it was the paper I remembered most strongly, its waxy finish, the lumpy surface where it was smoothed over sagging plaster, the purple curtains, and the greenish-brown hued picture of Highland cattle that hung over it. I thought it came from the bedroom where I'd always slept on visits to the farm. I also like this paper because it connects this farmhouse and our memories to the historical development of wallpaper. A version of this pattern first appeared on the 1960s sampler that I showed you earlier on in the talk. One final paper voiced different memories of the same time and place. For my grandma, it was a girl's room where her daughter Helen had her collection of dolls. For my mum, it was associated with unhappy feelings and a difficult time when her Auntie Muriel came to live at the farm with her two children, and her Uncle Derek was in prison. This hand-coloured engraving from 1735 shows a maker and layer of all kinds of coloured and printed papers, decked in her own creations. I'll now try to follow her lead and paste my own wallpapering account together with those that I started off with. Leslie Hoskins showed us that wallpaper was temporal, layered, and fragile. These properties allowed us to extract accounts of past lives and places. In a way, this was confirmed through our engagement with the wallpapers at Springfield House. Layered fragments of wallpaper were connected through our memories to build a narrative of places and lives that no longer existed. However, in this process, other qualities and complexities were exposed that could not be explained in a straightforward historical account. As Hoskins suggested, there was a temporality to wallpapers that was manifest in their accumulation on the wall. In the main bedroom, we were able to create a chronological account of 40 years of life in one room. However, the papers from elsewhere illustrated how this sense of time could also be condensed or warped. In the sitting room, shared memories and superficial resemblances in the papers blurred any temporal differences. Our memories sometimes contradicted the stratigraphy which the papers were found in, and through forgetting, we created memories that defied any neat historical ordering. The physical layering of wallpapers that Hoskins observed was also augmented in the papers from Springfield House by other distinctly archaeological traits. Our narrative was created from fragments of paper, much like broken shards of pottery are used to make archaeological interpretations. But before they were removed, these papers had a context that connected them to other features in the room. They butted up to door frames and window sills. There were areas missing where a piece of furniture against the wall could not be moved, and areas of accumulation where wallpapering had been carried out more often to cover up areas of damp or dirty fingerprints. Once the papers were stripped, hidden features were revealed, like blocked-in doors or the place of a former stairway. Charlotte Perkins Gilman illustrated how one particular wallpaper became alive and emotionally charged. Not a background, but something that mattered, an active and engaging player during a very upsetting time of her heroine's life. The wallpapers from Springfield House were perhaps less emotionally redolent, but still gave rise to strong sentiments that came to haunt us. As we went through these papers, fond and uncomfortable feelings were revived and renegotiated. A happy childhood moment, the hurt of being criticised, an unhappy time in the house. Together, the layering of papers and our memories played on these emotions. Feelings were entwined and reworked in the narratives we created. Happy memories were told and reaffirmed. Unwanted memories were silently papered over. So in retrospect, maybe Charlotte Perkins Gilman's fixation with the yellow wallpaper now seems more tangible. As her narrator told, there are things in that paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Victor Buckley gave an account of wallpapering that was transformative and historically situated. This is also true to a certain extent of the wallpapers from Springfield House. My grandma's wallpapering was in itself transformative. She moved into the house as a young mother and was keen to make her own impression on her in-laws' family home. The old decorative scheme was papered over. It was a way of materialising a fresh start. Although she always felt constrained by her budget, her wallpapering also drew on wider developments within the industry at that time. Just as was advocated in the 1960s magazine I showed you earlier on, she used a combination of colour washes and patterned papers, considered the coordination of papers and fabrics, and even chose a version of one of the papers that Hoskins showed as a sampler from this time. And maybe the wallpaper from Springfield House was also transformative in a different way. By sorting through these papers, revisiting our emotions, and narrating our memories, we also transformed ourselves. We collected these memories, along with their conflicts and harmonies, and in the process refurbished our understandings of both this house and each other. Thank you.